Good afternoon. My name is Harry Oberg. I'm the mayor of Prescott. Welcome to the Prescott Today show. I have two guests with me today, Mary Beth Wren and Peter Thomas. Today we're going to have two segments. The first segment will be with these two guests, and we're going to be talking about the genesis of HB 2107, which was put together, engineered, moved through the legislature by Representative Noel Campbell. He was fortunate to get it passed this year, and how that's going to affect some future ordinances that we're going to have here in Prescott. And then we're going to talk about one person's experience in dealing with house managers, which can kind of lay the groundwork for people understanding why we probably need to have the ordinance and the original legislation that allows us the ordinance. And then, of course, I'll have Peter Thomas come on, and he'll talk a little bit about drug recovery homes and the use of house managers, and in particular the way he uses them in his particular facility. So I think I'd like to start first with you, Mary Beth. Maybe you can just run us through right now the entire genesis of what happened before 2107 and caused 2107 to have to be passed, and then where we're going to go after we have this legislation now signed by the governor.
Sure. We only have an hour.
Yeah.
Great question, and it's been a problem that was very long in the making. What happens, and I guess we can start with that under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, alcohol and drug addiction is considered a disability. And so the homes are permitted to come into the single-family residence. And I think sometimes maybe the neighbors in Prescott were a little shocked by that. And so they did come into the neighborhoods, and the zoning and our land use ordinance code wasn't really up to snuff. And so there was a little disparity, and the homes started to come in, and nobody really knew what was going on. And they started to proliferate. And so then the city tried to pass ordinances and change them, and change the amount of unrelated people living in the home. As a result, there was a complaint filed with HUD. HUD did come in and investigate, and when they did, they found out how many homes were already set up in the city of Prescott. And also at the same time, the city commissioned a study by an outside consultant and sort of laid the pathway to how we could regulate the homes through our zoning ordinances.
And meet the requirements of the FHA. And
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And so what HUD found out is that the amount of homes we had in that, and by that time there was a map set up. It was a voluntary registration as far as what was out there, and the amount of clustering that was in effect was frightening. Because under the Fair Housing Act, what happens is the reason the recovery homes are permitted into single-family residences, you want the people in recovery to assimilate back into the neighborhoods so that they can see how people live, work, and return to their normal life as they recover. But what happened in the city of Prescott, there were so many residents that it became, as the consultant said, a de facto service district. That
it's almost like an institutionalized setting.
Correct. Yeah. That they really no longer were assimilating. That's exactly the correct terminology. It was institutionalized. They were only around other people in recovery, and so it really, in my terminology, it stood the Fair Housing Act on its head. That they were no longer living in single-family residences. So. And that really begat the idea of Representative Campbell that there really needed to be state intervention with this. And so that was when he first got elected 2 years ago, was to try and regulate this at the state level.
And I think, if I remember correctly, talking to the city attorney, after the study, we changed our ordinances. And at that time, HUD said that the ordinances were okay. They met the guidelines of the federal law. But that we had gone as far as we possibly could without any further authority from the state.
That's true. So because what that deals with is zoning. So what the zoning does, it allows you to have the houses set back and the spacing between the homes. But what happened in Prescott, because of the number of homes, what we realized is that there needed to be regulation within the homes. People have to understand that these residential homes, the way they are looked at, not just here in Arizona, but across the nation, that there are no actual medical services being provided in these homes. So the Health and Human Services Department, by and large, they don't touch the residences. So there's no regulation at all, and that's where the big problems come from. I say that tongue-in-cheek in a way, that you would literally have to take classes to slice lunch meat in your local grocery store, and that to be a house manager in these homes, there's nothing. And that's where I believe so many of the problems in the neighborhood sprang up.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about 2107, and I think the first year it failed.
Well, yes, the first year, and I think that was representatives. It was kind of you really have to educate people, Dana. That's probably the best way to do it. In this state, because the problem, I guess, in a way, with the recovery homes is so localized, you have to explain to the legislators what it is, why they would have to buy in. So his goal was to license the homes. And again, with Health and Human Services, it became a very difficult sell, so to speak, to not only with the department, but with the other legislators, because they looked at it as, and it was a political hot potato, so to speak, because they looked at it as, this is protected class. The lobbyists came out in the recovery industry, and they looked at it as the homes will be shut down. We won't be able to make the requirements. People in recovery won't be able to get the services they need, and it shut down pretty quickly as far as being able to pass any kind of legislation the first year out.
But I think in the second year, he set up an ad hoc committee and
Right.
and really did a lot more training and getting people involved and understanding the situation.
And that was a smart political move. What happens is, and that's all part of the educational process, you then had stakeholders involved, and that was a way to educate. So we had people from the business themselves. We had people that are involved in policy making. We had people from the insurance. There were people that, and this was probably the most critical aspect, we actually had neighbors affected by the homes. And what happened when they were able to tell their stories, and it struck to the heart of the health, safety, and welfare. And that was on both ends, and I think that's how the political discourse changed. And so the second year, Representative Campbell, what he did, and it started with raising the standard of care inside the homes. And that's really the genesis of 2107. Once he was able to talk to the legislators about that, raising the standard of care, that's when the other side of the aisle, and that was the buy-in to that. And that really was a success of that legislation, because the way he was able to frame that argument is, once you raise the standard of care, then the health and safety and welfare for the neighbors and the surrounding areas, that would improve as well.
And the clients.
And the clients, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we have 2107 passed, what are some of the opportunities that we have within the legislation to help better the management of the homes here?
Well, the legislation itself is permissive, and that was another big buy-in for the other side of the aisle, because by and large, a lot of people don't like regulation. So what it allowed was to have, if a county, city, or municipality felt that they had a problem with structured sober living, and it was very narrowly defined in the bill, that they could pass ordinances. And what the bill allowed, the legislation, was 3 specific things. It allowed for written notification. And now for the first time, municipalities or counties had the power to actually demand who's out there. At this point, it's been voluntary. So now we actually have the contractual relationship. Most of these homes are rented. And there was actual stories where a person rented their home through an agency, and they did not know that their home was rented to a recovery agency, and the home burned to the ground. And it was said in this ad hoc committee that, wow, I would never have rented my home to recovery because I didn't want smoking. I was afraid of my home burning to the ground. So these are the kind of things that I think homeowners then at least have the option. Now, I will see if I give my property in an agency, I will know who's out there. And they'll know, like, number of tenants and things like that. So that gives, I think people on both sides of the aisle, some security in that, the clients, the city, and the owners. The next thing the legislation will allow are supervisory requirements. And I think this is the linchpin to everything, as I see, is the weakest point in the industry's process. At this point, as I said before, there are no supervisory requirements at all. And what these ordinances will allow is for the county or city to actually draft some things. For example, we can now require certain levels of education, certain levels of training. The ordinances could reflect the amount of awake staff they would want these homes to have. All these things could be dictated in an ordinance, greater or lesser degree, depending on whatever that municipality felt that it needed. The third thing that the bill requires is an operational plan that facilitates the recovery process. And that is really a pivotal thing too, because what happened here in Prescott is a lot of times the clients were let go from these programs for a myriad of reasons, whether it was a minor infraction for house rules, whether it was insurance ran out. Sometimes these clients did leave against staff advice, but hopefully these ordinances will reflect an exit plan. We found out that these good programs have an exit strategy. What happens when you see the client starting to relapse and they might want to leave, or there's infractions or the insurance. They just don't go to our town square and open the van doors and let these kids out. So these were the things that the bill allows the counties and cities to do, and I think it's an excellent start.
Okay, great. So it sounds to me like we're going to have more operational control if we can build what you're talking about into the ordinance. I think what I'd like to do now, we had another gentleman that was supposed to be here today. You know him, Glenn
Sure.
Martin, and I think he has a story that kind of reflects for the audience what he ran into and what probably a lot of other people run into in the industry, in particular where you don't have trained house managers. And I think you know his story. Can you relate his story very quickly?
Sure. I met Glenn, and it was during Representative Campbell's ad hoc committee, and I think, and this is what changed the discourse in this. I think when the legislators started to hear how poignant some of these stories are, and nothing is worse than what Glenn and Jill went through. Their son was in a recovery home, and what happened as a result of an untrained staff, their son started using again in the home. And the house manager literally did not know the difference between a stomach virus and someone actively using drugs. He was sent to bed, and their son died and choked on his vomit and died that night. The house was less than 2 miles from the hospital. And these are the kind of things that I believe a strong ordinance and having a trained supervisory staff will absolutely stop. And Glenn and Jill, they're not the only parents that have gone through this. You can check Facebook. There's sites set up solely to the parents that have just gone through this. This is really, it's criminal what goes on, and this story repeats itself all the time.
Yeah. If I remember the story, also, the son was in, I think, a car accident or a motorcycle accident, had some pretty extensive injuries, and then had a lot of recurring pain.
Right.
And I think he was put on painkillers, and as it happens with many people on painkillers today, oxycodone in particular, they become addicted to it. And so he tried to get off it. I think he was in 2 or 3 programs where he had some limited success. But a lot of times the pain would finally get bad enough he would go back on it. And so I think that's, I'd like to just portray the picture of, this guy didn't just decide he wanted to do this.
Right. Now this is unfortunately this heroin epidemic. You have young kids it's everybody's next door neighbor. You're right. It starts with something so innocuous. It was a back injury, and he's this good kid, straight A student, playing sports, and within a short period of time, his whole life is turned upside down. And again, this is repeating itself across the country of this heroin epidemic, that you have the kid next door no one knows what happens to them in such a short time. The next, because heroin is then cheaper than oxycodone, they're now shooting up, and it's just a horrible epidemic, and it's sweeping across the country, and that's why good programs are so needed in this country. I mean,
Right.
we really have to do a good job, and I've always said all along, give these kids a true shot at sobriety. They need the help.
You know, and sometime back, I asked the county coroner how many OD deaths we had last year from related to drugs, drug use, and he said it was 42. And for a town of 40,000, that's far, far above the national average. So it's clear to me that there's some drug use occurring in the homes, and I think it's occurring in the homes because you don't have managers that are effectively trained to know when somebody might be using again, or they're asleep, and they may not even be in a position to monitor the people and make sure that they don't leave the facility and go out and get something and you know, get themselves another hit. I'd like to now go ahead and introduce Peter Thomas, Executive Director for Chapter 5. You're a licensed facility. I think you have both a medical component that I think we call a intensive outpatient clinic, where you actually have your professional staff, your doctors and things of that nature, and you can correct me as we go here.
Sure.
And then you have the residential area where you have men living in one quarter, women in another quarter, where they have house managers. Are your residential facilities, are they in neighborhoods, or are they commercial areas?
All of our facilities are in a commercially zoned area,
Okay.
and I want to clarify our licensing a little bit. We have 4 licenses. We have a men's residential facility, and that is a medical facility. We conduct counseling in there. We do assisted self-administration of medication. They get nursing assessments. There's a lot of structure there, and that is through the Arizona Department of Health Services. We have the same license for a women's facility, and then we have 2 outpatient clinics that are all along West Gurley Street in a commercially zoned area.
Okay. And I know you're part of NARA, the Northern Arizona Recovery Association, and sometime back you came in and got me involved, and I know Noel Campbell involved in looking at trying to make sure this Bill 2107 got passed, and that it was going to be effective to help the industry improve overall. And so can you talk a little bit about your house managers and how they're trained and how you utilize them? Do you have 24-hour staff?
We do. For our licensure, the state mandates that we have 4.2 house managers per facility. So each house manager works up to 40 hours a week. It's a shift position. Our shifts are from 8 to 5, 4 to midnight, midnight to 8 a.m. They get a lunch break in there. And we found it to be really important that we have awake staff all the time, especially in the swing hours. People are coming home from work, or they're out of groups. They may be interacting with each other. They may have emotional reactions come up. And that's a time when a lot of people may act out behaviorally, and they need that support. And then, it's Mary Beth and I were talking before the meeting. Overnight, if the house manager is sleeping, there's a lot of opportunity for people to sneak away, to get into trouble. If they have sleeplessness, which is really common for people that are recently off of opiates, they may be up stewing in their history and get really triggered, and there's an opportunity for them to get away, get drugs. And as you mentioned with the Martin son, really tragic outcomes can happen.
And how do you train your house manager? You know, we're going to have, in the next segment, we're going to be talking about a training program that we're trying to get by college to start for us and to help the industry. But I know that you train your folks. What level do you train them to, and you know, what are some of the key things that they need to know?
I can't quote an exact number of hours. It's probably 24 to 30, but training starts right away. Ideally, we're hiring a candidate who already has experience. Regardless, they come in, the training starts right away. Their first day, when they're doing their HR paperwork, they get an orientation of all the different programs, what those different pieces do. So the medical, clinical, residential, admissions, our administrative staff, upper leadership. So they have a real comprehensive understanding of what our business does.
Let me just ask you there for a second. You said they came to you with some experience. So does that mean that they have already been house manager someplace else, or had some kind of training and counseling or something?
Either or both. One of our house managers right now worked at Spring Ridge Academy, which is a therapeutic boarding school for women. There's a lot of really good experience there. With other house managers, it can be either a pro or a con. If they're coming from an established facility that has good policies and procedures, good training, it's great to be able to hire somebody that has that experience. But some of the other facilities in town who have practices that we don't condone or operate less ethically, we have to not only train them, but get them to break old habits, which is a real challenge. One thing that's been really important is hiring for people that want to learn and grow, and then we can train for a lot of the skills. And touching on your previous question about the specific trainings, a big piece is just behavioral health 101. We're a behavioral health facility. They need to know how to interact with the clients as patients, because they are patients. It's not just somebody who's acting up behaviorally. They may have significant trauma in their past, sexual violence, all sorts of reasons that they ended up where they are. Along with that, crisis prevention intervention, being able to work with the clients if they do get escalated, being able to talk them down, maintain that real therapeutic rapport, and make sure that we're not causing further harm by becoming combative with them or pushing them out.
So it sounds like they have to be fairly mature, and they're
Yeah.
able to take fairly fragile clients, and maybe sometimes be a father, sometimes a friend.
Yeah, and that touches on boundaries. Maturity is really, really important. It's hard if somebody's coming right out of a treatment program themselves, or they're pretty new to sobriety. They're working with people who are in their same age group a lot of times, similar histories. There's a lot of shared experience. And so while being able to be supportive, the staff are not the friends of our clients and patients. They need to be able to maintain an authoritative role and really provide care. And that's a hard balance for anybody, but especially somebody who doesn't have an inherent level of maturity.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. I was at the training session the other day where they were looking at developing this program, and it was very interesting to hear what many of the people in the industry were saying was needed in the way of house manager training. And I know maturity and like you say, setting boundaries and knowing how to maintain a proper rapport with the clients is very, very important. Yeah. I want to thank Mary Beth for coming in and letting us know about 2107 and where we're going to go with our ordinances. And thank you, Peter, for coming in and telling us how a licensed facility does it. And I think you do it right. I've always been very pleased with our relationship and your help in 2107 and help me understand the industry here, so that I can be more responsive to both the clients and the neighbors, the community in general. And of course, I started the ad hoc committee on drug rehab. Basically, that allows both the people that are clients in the homes or people in neighborhoods that have homes next to them that might have complaints to have an opportunity to come in and talk about their issues. If we find out that they do in fact have something that is actionable, then we will give it to the police or give it to some element in the city to try and find a remedy for them and eliminate whatever the issue is. And I know you've helped me understand that quite a bit, so I appreciate that very much. So anyway, I think we'll close this segment and thank you again.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll be back shortly with two new guests and talking about training the house managers.
All right.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Prescott Today show. My name is Harry Oberg, and I'm the Mayor of Prescott. This is the second segment. We had an earlier segment with Mary Beth Wren and Peter Thomas from Chapter 5, in which we were talking about the genesis of legislation that has occurred in the past that led us up to where we are today, actually looking at probably having more oversight on the recovery homes in Prescott and trying to get a training program started for house managers with Yavapai College. So my guests today are Molly McGinn. She's a managing partner with Treehouse, which is basically an educational
Right. It's an educational program for young adults in recovery.
Yeah. And also I have Doug Dolan here, who is co-owner with Recovery in the Pines. That's a licensed facility.
Correct.
And I believe you have both an IOP and a residential facility, but all your residential facilities are in commercial areas. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we've had two people on today that have managed homes here that do not really have any of their homes in the residential areas. They're in commercial areas. So I know a lot of people are very probably happy about that.
They are.
But I think what I like to do is indicate that you had a training session yesterday,
Right.
and maybe you can just talk about how we got there
Okay.
and what happened there, and where you think you're going to go with the information that you learned yesterday.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So yesterday we invited about 50 individuals, including yourself and other city officials, and 32 of the members of the treatment community. Matt Force was there. We had members of the police department. We had adult probation coming together to have a focus group. And the whole purpose of that was to get input on the training program that we're designing. So when all of this, the legislation started to come through at the state level, and there was a request at the city level for some input from us on what could go into the training. It seemed absolutely the right thing to do for there to be support for house managers in a well thought through 4-day training program, to be able to give them support once the legislation or once the ordinance comes through requiring a certain standard. So we put together a team that's highly qualified to be able to put together this training program, and we designed that training program, and then we invited the treatment community, house managers, et cetera, in yesterday to take a look at what we were doing and ask for input and get other ideas. And at the same time, and as part of that training program, there is a component in there about behavior towards the sort of civility piece of it, the good neighbor thinking, and the perception of the treatment community by the public and by people in Prescott, and the relatively negative perception that's come across, and really thinking through how can we change behavior, how can house managers help with that, how can owners of the treatment facilities themselves really help with that. And we got lots of great ideas.
And I think one reason why you had them was partly to get buy-in,
Yeah.
but secondly to get a better understanding of all the conditions in the homes you might not be aware of.
Right, right. So at the tables, people were able to discuss, if we had a set of practices that were consistent across the communities, or at least upheld across the communities, what would we want those to be? And when people start to talk about that, we know that there are issues that are troublesome in their own communities, and that these practices would help. So I think that was the idea, is just to open the conversation to find out what is it that's going on that maybe a piece of the training could really help that we hadn't really seen coming. And one example would be that there, at several of the tables, they suggested motivational interviewing, for example, as an addition. Also, a course on critical thinking, or some addition of critical thinking skills and training into some of the components that we already have. So these were great ideas. And we got excellent ideas also on the component around kind of being a good neighbor. And what are some of the practices that people could do? And one example was that we have one individual who had been an executive director of a treatment facility in Wisconsin said that he walked up and down the street when he became executive director and handed his business card out at every house and said, if there are any problems, anything that concerns you, call me. Like, I'm here, And he just established that early on. And that really paid off. I mean, he had one thing that happened, and a woman called, and he was able to sort it out quickly.
So what you're saying is that he was letting people know who he was, so if they had issues with his facility, they knew who to contact?
That's right.
Okay.
They knew who to call.
Okay.
Because that was part of what came up the tables that surprised us, I think, is that, I don't know why it surprised us, but because we hadn't thought about it, but was that the neighbors, have an issue and they might say something to a house manager or to the van driver. It's like, guys, could you keep the music down? And they say, oh, okay, or they may, whatever, they say something, but they don't know if it ever gets to anybody that's going to make a decision, and will that go to the next van driver? It's like, who would I call? And so I think that idea of having what we used to call in the corporate world one throat to choke is that, and it's a good thing. Actually, it's like, where's the one person to go to who has a voice and is going to make a difference? And it lets people feel like, okay, it's going to be helpful. So maybe I can call them instead of, escalating the problem further. And if they've given me their card, they've encouraged me to call. So I thought it was a great example.
Instead of calling 911 or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
So what are some of the things that I think that you're looking at about 24, 30-hour course length?
That's right. We're looking at a 4-day course that is 6 hours a day. So it's 24 hours of training. And it would be at Yavapai College. Right now, we are scheduled actually to start in September. It will start September, the first 2 days of the course will start September 9th and 10th. And the next 2 days, this is a Friday, Saturday schedule. And we did that because, one, in talking with people, it would accommodate house manager schedules. So Friday, Saturday would be the first 4-day course. And some of the components that we have in the course, and there will be additions because of yesterday's input, but they are the disease model of addiction, which makes complete sense as thinking of addiction as a disease, and therefore as a disease, how do we respond to that? There's also dual conversations on mental illness and dual diagnosis, of course, that come into that. A big piece was crisis prevention and intervention, and how do house managers who are not clinical or clinically trained, how do they effectively begin to deal with a person who's kind of going into crisis or having a crisis? How can they interact in such a way that it de-escalates or they prevent it from escalating? Part of the issue has been that house managers typically are young. They might have graduated not that long ago from their own program. They may be relatively early in their own sobriety. So their own emotional development and capacity to deal with someone else's upset may be limited.
Yeah.
So we saw this really as a key component, and we actually put two modules there. So we had a module with role play and practice and coaching and feedback to be able to really give people some hands-on practice with that. So I can go through some of the other pieces if you like. So we're looking at clients' rights and responsibilities. So what the really within the law and within the practice, within a solid therapeutic practice, what are the natural rights and responsibilities of clients? Also, client confidentiality and professional communication. And this has to do really with what's okay to say to a client or to say about a client to another client and what's not. So what are the rules of confidentiality? Many house managers might even share an apartment with someone who's a house manager at another program. And so the idea of what are the things I don't talk about with them about our clients, for example. Or even to parents, if parents come to visit, what's appropriate to say about any of the roommates, for example, of a client. So this is just keeping people safe and really being respectful of clients and helping house managers really have that information. First aid and CPR, for sure. And these will be taught by individuals who really understand the treatment industry, understand addiction, alcoholism, and know the types of emergencies that are going to come up in those houses. So we also have ethics and professional conduct. And this is also in it's professional boundaries. It's also in conversations with parents. If they bring their the client back from, let's say, a family visit, if the client is out for a day and they bring them back, it's like, how does that house manager interact with the parents and with others house managers? And then a big piece on kind of reversing the stigma, how we present ourselves in public, how do we bring the van into the parking lot at wherever we're shopping, and the behavior in the market, demeanor, all of that. And we know that we're dealing with a population that is really going through a transformation. There is a kind of group culture within the treatment centers. So it's going to take modeling, it's going to take some encouragement, but I think people need to be able to really wake up and understand the impact they have on the neighborhood. And ultimately, it's also helping set up clients and house managers for a successful career down the line as they go to look for jobs, when they graduate out of their program, and if they stay in this community or live in another community, they need to be able to present themselves, in a way that's going to help them be successful.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you were talking about yesterday, why you're trying to do this in a education setting rather than just maybe getting a room downtown or something, or maybe even in one of the recovery homes.
Right.
You felt that it was important to have this relationship with the college. Can you explain that?
Sure. I think from at Treehouse, we're really committed. Our whole mission is about helping young adults in recovery head back into college or start college, and to give them that good solid bridge, because the numbers are stunning. The success numbers are very solid, that when a young adult who's in recovery gets support in college and a place to study together, social connections, they tend to be at the top quarter of their class. They have a 29% higher graduation rate than other people on the college campus. And we see this when we look at programs that are starting up now on college campuses across the country. So when we think about house managers, we want them to come onto a college campus, even for our 4-day course, and think of themselves and kind of picture themselves as being college students. And what we would love to see is that they get excited about that, maybe take a class, and they can keep working. They will be doing a better job for their treatment facility. And they can take a class and keep working. And we expect the data would predict, actually, from doing crisis prevention and intervention, that the retention rate of clients would go up, that the retention rate of house managers would go up, that the negative incident rate would go down, that this training would pay for itself many, many fold in job satisfaction, more competence, and being able to handle tough situations better, de-escalating them. Okay. So we ultimately want to see fewer people released onto the streets without a plan, having gotten better and full and being able to complete their programs, the clients be able to complete the program, and the house managers also having a vision of the future and starting their own educational path.
Yeah. Now, I believe your course is going to have some kind of certificate at the end.
It
because,
is.
we're going to be looking at a business license coming up. It'll probably start
Right.
at the first of the year. And as people come in and register their homes, one of the things we're going to require is some kind of evidence of certification for the house manager. So I assume you're going to provide that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That this is a certificate program. The dean of the College for Community Education is going to be presenting the certificates that will include all of the components that I've mentioned, plus a few new pieces that are coming in as a result of the input that we got yesterday. And that will be a documented demonstration that people have gone through the course. And we would really love to see not only the house managers, but the owners and the managers, the program directors coming through the course as well, because they're going to need to support their house managers. And this is all very current. This is coming out of ASU, master's level, School of Social Work. it would be, really an excellent kind of raising the bar, raising the standard. I think we're creating a model really for Prescott to become a kind of center of excellence, really for client care, to stabilize and raise the quality of client care by helping those that have direct influence and direct connection and the most hours really with clients, have better tools to do that. And we'd like to see Prescott not only be a great place, really a sort of destination, if you will, for good solid recovery, good solid client care and treatment, but also a place where people that are interested in this as a field to want to come and work here.
Okay. Why don't we move on to Doug here for a couple minutes? You have recovery in the Pines.
I do.
And you've heard what Molly's had to say. I know you have your own home house managers right now. I know your partner was sitting at my table yesterday and talking a bit about how you have structured your house manager training and the qualifications they have to have. So I guess my first question would be, can you explain how you're doing it today? And then number two, do you think what you're hearing in the way of this training program is going to be beneficial? Maybe not for you, because I think most of your people you get come in already have some kind of educational background in this, where there's a lot of homes in town that don't have the same quality of house managers you have. So I guess I'm asking if you think this training program is going to be able to meet that need.
Well, so first off, I think it's an excellent start. We need to get started somewhere, so to have nothing and just simply see what happens, I don't think is the way to go. Relative to our program, what we take a look at is the end goal isn't just getting sober. That's really a baseline requirement. It's really about, and now what? What's the life that you're going to create for yourself? And the housing managers probably spend more time with the people in our program than anybody else. And so they see these individuals sometimes at their most vulnerable, because sometimes people can be good in a classroom setting and they may have just gone through an experience, and now that they've gotten out of the classroom, they may be exhibiting signs of what they went through in the classroom. So it's really good for having strong individuals that are around those people that can see the signs. And as Molly brought up earlier, is that prevention and intervention. That is critical. That is key, because you can stop somebody from getting off course, hopefully, or assisting them in getting off course, so it doesn't escalate into something where somebody's being discharged from a program and may not get the help that they need. For us, we do take a look at our housing managers are typically between the ages of about 28 to 55. So we don't just have somebody that is a young individual that is just a couple of months sober themselves, that although this may be a profession that they want to get into, may still be so early on in their own recovery that adding the extra stressors of going from being a peer to being somebody that's supposed to be supervising these individuals, the rest of their peer group may not acknowledge them in that way. They may test them in a variety of ways, and the individual may not be prepared, whether it's because of just a limited time in their own recovery or not having the training like we're talking about on how to deal with those situations. So it's not good for the patients, and it's not good for that particular housing manager who may be early on in recovery. It puts them at risk. So I think this is a good place to start as far as getting some education. I do think it's something that will evolve over time, because I'm sure that, as Molly mentioned, as people are coming together and as they're discussing what their experiences are, the best is to take those real world environments and put them into this think tank per se. And now, how do we train people to deal with those different situations? So, when we look at our house managers, we look at them as, do you have the capability to exhibit the qualities and the characteristics and the morals of what we're trying to help instill in the men that are going through our programs? If you don't, we don't need a babysitter. We need somebody that's inspirational to these individuals and can coach them and teach them on how to achieve that quality of life that they seek. Because if they don't learn new habits, if they don't start creating a new life for themselves that they're excited about, they're at high risk for slipping backwards and relapsing.
And I think one thing I heard yesterday was maturity, in the home house manager, understanding boundaries. I guess that means knowing how to not become somebody's best friend. Maybe, you should be remain somewhat aloof so that you can be more in a supervisory role. Am I correct on that? Or
You're correct on that. So we are a men's Christian 12-step based program, and some of the cornerstones of our program are Christian faith, our belief in the 12 steps, as well as our clinical aspects that we add to recovery, our health and wellness program, and the life skills that we add into that. So we need people that can identify where somebody may be struggling in those different areas, and how do we coach them up that they can grow in those different areas. And so it takes life experience. I'm a father. I have certain perspectives as being a father that I see in dealing with my kids, that I'm their parent first, I'm their friend second. And so sometimes when you take somebody that, again, it might be 3 months further along within a program as somebody, he's already been identified as a friend or somebody that's a peer. Now to try to transition him into a role where he's in a role of authority first, that can be a very tough transition.
right. Let's talk for a moment about exit programs, because that's part of the ordinance that we got coming up. I think you might have talked about it a little bit yesterday. I think it's going to be somewhat into your training curriculum, but
We did speak about it. It came up yesterday, and the idea of an exit program or an exit strategy per se is a transition out strategy and a transition plan. And in general, the recommendation is for any treatment facility that's going to release someone is to have 3 different references for places they could go, and would have checked in advance, even called to see if they'll cover insurance, etc. So that in many cases doesn't happen. So the community at the tables yesterday was beginning to talk about what could we do as a community to establish some kind of a practice or even a place where people who have left AMA, who are walking out the door, or who have been released from their programs for a variety of reasons, could go to be safe. And what could that look like? So that was part of the open discussion, for sure. It's in the training program itself, because that hasn't been established through the community, we wouldn't have that specific piece. But I think that's part of our role, is to help lead that conversation and bring the community to some I think, creative thinking with the city on how that could be handled.
yeah. And I think one thing we need to make sure everybody understands is that a person cannot be kept in the program. If they really want to leave, they have the
Right.
opportunity to leave,
Right.
Even if they're court ordered.
even if the court ordered.
Right.
So we're talking about is the ones that probably relapsed for some reason, or broke a house rule, or in some case we find no longer have insurance. So how do you handle people that you exit from your program?
So the worst time to do exit planning is when somebody's exiting. You need to take it a couple of steps backwards. So where we believe it begins is it really begins with a really good interview before the person comes into the program, because we need to see, are we an appropriate fit for this individual? Do they understand what they're committing themselves to? So we're very open and we're very transparent about the fact that we're a 6-month to a year plus program. So somebody that says that they're looking for a 30, 60, 90-day program, that's not us. So we're not going to be appropriate. Again, being a Christian-based program, some people, that's not what they're seeking. That's not what they're looking for. So we don't bring somebody in without them understanding what it is that they're committing to. And that's a big part of it, because you don't want to import an unwell population and then find out for whatever reason that they're not appropriate for your census, or they don't feel that we're appropriate for their needs, and they discharge themselves, or we have to discharge them for acting out or whatever reason. So it's good to have a really strong entrance policy. Then, as Molly mentioned, it's good to have your list of referrals that you know where an individual can go, that if it's a situation, and obviously the ultimate goal is that they successfully complete and you have a good plan from there, but that if they do not successfully complete, whether that's something that they choose to discharge themselves or we choose to discharge them as a program, that we have a place of referral. The other thing that we also do at Recovery in the Pines as part of our program is we also offer a shuttle service down to Sky Harbor. The reason why we do that is in the last 4 years, I think we've had one person from our program that actually lived in this community. Everybody else either came from the valley or they came from somewhere else. What we don't want to do is we don't want to import, again, an unwell population and then just dump them on the streets of Prescott. Now, I can't force them on a shuttle, but most people who are choosing to leave and don't want to go, that's if they don't have another program for whatever reason that they're choosing to go to next, which again, we can't force that on them either. We can give strong recommendations of what we believe would be good, but at least they can get somewhere where they are either back to their home city if they're down from the valley, or they can travel from Sky Harbor and get back to wherever it is that they're going to. We don't want to just simply cut them loose on the street. I do have, unfortunately, I've had some rare examples where an individual said, no, I'm not going to take the shuttle, I'm just going to hang out here. You know, so you can't force them on the shuttle either, but then we also notify people of, you know, if somebody's discharged themselves.
Right. Well, obviously this has been a great discussion. I think there's a lot more we could have said here today. We've just barely scratched the surface, I can
Right.
tell you that. But I want to thank you, Molly, for coming in, and Doug. And I hope the listeners out there had an opportunity to learn today about what we're trying to do to try and improve the drug recovery outcomes here and improve the safety, health, and welfare in the home. So have a great day. Thank you for watching.